Good afternoon. I'm Mark Edwards, the Academic Dean, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon panel session. And I'm the moderator for the panel is Belva Brown-Jordan, the Dean for Student Life here at the Divinity School. And Belva, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to our afternoon panel discussion. This afternoon, we're going to hear from a number of our distinguished alumni about not just their experience at HDS, but how religion has influenced them in their lives. I was thinking about this panel and how I might want to kind of help frame our discussion this afternoon. And just yesterday, I was in a conversation with someone about the intersection or the interaction between learning and education. And I remember when I was at Lancaster Seminary and was in the classroom, I always began my first lecture and session with talking to the students about hoping that they would go out from my class having learned something that would help them to consider life in a way in which they had not considered it before. And I think about the same way about how being at Harvard Divinity School might have influenced the lives of our panelists this morning, that hopefully while they were there, they learned something that not only helped them think about life in a different way, but shaped the way, therefore, they have decided to live their lives. And we're going to hear some of their stories this afternoon. I'm going to introduce each one of our panelists, and then they will each have 10 minutes to speak with you, and then we'll have an opportunity to entertain some questions at the end of their presentations. Our first panelist is Tom Chappell. At HDS, Tom was profoundly influenced both personally and professionally. While at Harvard Divinity School, he was able to draw upon the philosophy of key influences and how that gave him a world view. He was able to take the pillars and the values of religion into business, and by integrating them, change the enterprise. Our next speaker will be Joseph Roccasalvo. At HDS, he was given the intellectual and linguistic resources to become a translator. Translation is critical, and he sees himself as the man in the middle. He was able to see the shift from faith-seeking understanding to faith-seeking imagination. This has manifested itself in his new play, The Gospel of Limerick. And then we will have Leng. Leng identifies with both Harvard Divinity School and Harvard Business School, and as a management consultant and coach, he uses skills from both worlds to be successful. His time at HDS helped him to seek and to ask his clients, where does the Spirit lie? Where is the holy? Where is the joy? And ask where courage and religious journey integrate with successful business. He saw the Divinity School as a place to stir up courage, good words, and good works. And then we will hear from Diana Phillips. Diana has followed a unique religious path, from a Quaker to a United Church of Christ pastor to a hospital chaplain. Harvard Divinity School allowed her to journey in different directions with open intellectual query. She felt as though she was given permission and freedom to pursue her journey, empowerment. I invite us to be open as we hear the presentations of our panelists.
Thank you, Belva. As you mentioned in your introduction, I was significantly influenced by some prophetic messages that really did change my worldview. And it affected how I ran the business that I had been running for 15 years. It affected how I thought about my service work to others in my profession and also my civic and personal life. I'm thinking about two influences that made a significant difference while here, and one was the study of Jonathan Edwards, who speaks of the nature of reality as being as relation. And prior to any prior thought about the subject, I had always thought that reality was what I experienced inside my own head and inside my own body, and that this idea that I was interconnected and ultimately interrelated to absolutely everything, so that there was no private ground on which I could stand, was a little provoking, but I let it sink in, and I thought about the nature of business as relation instead of business as a private legal document in which I had private rights as the owner of the company in the land of free enterprise. And so I created a new view that the company was interrelated to all kinds of things, the people with whom I work, the community, the environment, consumers that we served, the government, absolutely everything, including the future, carried a relation and therefore a responsibility. And so I was sort of pulled out of the world of private rights and into the world of responsibility through an interrelated network. A second message that got through to me was the notion that Martin Buber speaks of, that we live in one of two worlds, any of us, one in which we are constantly calculating a relation that we have with an object or a person or a thought such that we can create some gain out of that relationship. And another mindset, another view is that in which we stand in honor of the very awe of what is ultimate about the nature of the entity that we are beholding. And Buber helps us see in his book, I and Thou, that we can actually learn to move so quickly between these two mindsets as we behold an object or a person or an idea, that we actually learn to integrate those two views into one way of being, an integrated way of being with that relation. And so I've thought about this in terms of where do we therefore take these ideas into the world of leadership, how do these concepts of theology inform my leadership. And so we started with, at the company Toms of Maine, my wife and I said, well, really what we need to do is ask ourselves, what do we deeply care about here? What are the values of this company? And how do they inform the choices that we're going to make? And we worked with a board of directors and executive team to develop this concept of what ultimately became our statement of beliefs. Other companies might call it a corporate credo or core values. We called it our statement of beliefs, some 8 or 10 beliefs, but summing it up, we said we believe that we could delight customers with products made from natural ingredients, to be financially successful, but also to do this in a way that was environmentally sensitive and socially responsible. So we set the cornerstones of a new way of thinking. That holistic view established our accountability now, how we had to align to our values. That kind of thinking doesn't end in a board retreat. It then has to be transferred down into the system throughout everybody. And so we ultimately learned that this was not training just for leadership. It was a matter of training for everyone in the company, so that everyone in the company had access to a better understanding of these. We do many other things that are trying to think about our responsibilities in this to customers. We're working with plants and minerals all the time to understand the biological activity of certain herbs to render some kind of therapeutic benefit to the consumer. We are conscious of the packaging materials that we're using, the recyclability and recycled nature of the paper that we use accounts today for 6,000 acres of trees that still stand today because they haven't had to be cut down because we have a policy for environmental sustainability. We finish our workday at noontime on Friday in the summer because we live in a summer resort and we believe our people should enjoy the summer resort because everyone else is coming to Maine to enjoy us. So we decided that we would get our work done between early Monday morning and noontime Friday, and we've been practicing that lifestyle phenomenon for years, and there are many other things, including 10% of our profits going back into the community and 5% of our collective time as members of the community going to volunteerism in the community. All this while we are growing at 14-15% a year and making more and more money, and the fastest growing toothpaste in the country today, and evidence that values that reach down into what Buber was talking about, combining the head and the heart, are going to motivate us and make us more passionate about innovating new ways and doing things differently. I've authored 2 books, one in particular called The 7 Intentions of Value-Centered Leadership, and that's where we're talking about the tools of how to integrate head and heart, because I don't think we learn how to integrate head and heart. That's something we have to learn to do, and the tools to do that are the subject of both a book I've written and a nonprofit educational foundation called the Saltwater Institute that teaches the tools of values integration. So it's been a wonderful journey. I've been able to drop out of those institutional things that I do in life, of boards that go in circles, and feel that I can put my feet on the ground with my education and go full steam ahead and try to create something with others that is creating impact in the world. So I'm very grateful. This was a transforming experience for me, and I do think very much that religion does inform leadership. I think that leaders need to know who they are, fundamentally. Leaders need to lead by previously identified and articulated shared values, and we need to tell stories among one another about what's working and what's not with this kind of wisdom work. Thank you.
My name is Joseph Roccasalvo, and I'm a professor of comparative religion and Buddhist studies at Fordham University. I did my PhD work through the yard, but I used many of the professors from Harvard Divinity who trained me and who are responsible for a lot of my abilities to teach and to become what I call myself, the man in the middle. I need to explain that a little bit. Several weeks ago, after deciding that I was no longer going to read the New York Times and that I decided to become a devotee of the International Trib, having just come back from Europe and having read it religiously every day, I turned the page and found an article about a man who is a translator. His name is Victor Sukadrev. And what was interesting about him was that over 30 years of translating, he remained as this visibly invisible person behind 2 people. Eisenhower was one side and Khrushchev the other, Carter and Brezhnev, Reagan and Gorbachev. He was the man in the middle. He was the one who was visibly invisible, who acted as the intermediary, who was the point man for understanding, without whom the audience could not understand the interaction. He was the conduit, if you will. And he speaks of himself as someone who was self-effacing, and yet at the same time, whose ego was very much to the fore, who denied the applause that was given to his two interlocutors, but realized that the applause was not possible without him. And I said to myself, you know what? I've been a man in the middle. I've done this for years. I've had Buddha on the one side and my students on the other. I'm the man in the middle. I've had Jesus on the one side and my religious congregation on the other. Again, an intermediary. And I said to myself, how does this happen? Well, I suppose if I wanted to get too psychoanalytical, I could say that as a child, I was acting as interpreter for my twin brother and sister because my original language was Italian. And when I eventually came back to live with my mom and dad, though they saw me regularly, I was the one who interpreted for my brother and my sister what the grown-ups were saying in private, in Italian. So from a very early age, I acted in this kind of bifocal, binary way. Where does Harvard come in? Well, I suppose they just added, as it were, fuel to the fire. I can remember spending hundreds of hours in the cavernous depths of One Divinity Avenue with Professor Nagatomi, translating from Pali text, Theravada Buddhist text, into English. I was unordained at the time and somewhat equivocal about becoming a Roman Catholic priest. I was enjoying my freedom at Harvard. I was a seminarian on the loose a little bit. And he said to me, you know, Joe, I value you as you are now, but I would appreciate more if you would become a priest. He said, you know, I am the son of a Shinran Buddhist. And he said, though I did not go on to take on the temple, which was hereditary, I am very much given to people who act as bridges. We were back again to the image, man in the middle. Those hours of translation, of rendering the proper nuance of the nuance, the precision, the accurate word without being pedantic, was an extraordinary practice session, if you will, for what I've become. There is a certain sense in which I was becoming so much more than one thing that my religious superiors once, just before ordination, said, listen, we have to ask you a question. Are you a Buddhist or a Christian? And I responded equivocally, I wasn't aware I had to choose. What does that mean for my teaching? Well, you know, theology as the methodological attempt to understand faith or divine revelation, whether it be scripture or tradition, through the resources of the reason, that effort of faith-seeking understanding, is certainly an intellectual endeavor, and one that goes on here at Harvard at every level. Okay? And I have to do that in my class because it's an intellectual enterprise. But as I have become more and more engaged with my students, I realize that many of them are unchurched. Many of them don't know the basic narratives of creation, redemption, incarnation. Or if they happen to be Buddhists, they know very little about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. They are largely, though spiritually, deft. People without an anthropology, a metaphysics, a coherent point of view. And they are shopping around. And the best way, it seems for me, to address them is by way of stories. Now, it is true, I am intellectual in the class, but I determined that it was no longer going to be just that. It had to be not fides quaerens intellectum, faith-seeking understanding, but fides quaerens imaginationem. So, as a result of that, I sat down and over a couple of years wrote 3 novels, which were 3 thrillers of the spiritual life. How's that for balancing opposites? And then, quite by accident, a woman friend of mine said to me, listen, my nephew is marrying a Jew. He's Catholic. They're going to be both audiences. Could you do something to represent the Catholic contingent? And I said, what do you have in mind? She said, you're good at verse. Could you put perhaps something from the gospel in verse form? I wrote the wedding feast at Cana in limericks. It was performed that day for the first time. It was a ripping success. So much so that a priest friend of mine asked me to do this regularly for his bulletin. I am now performing a show in New York City called Gospel Limerick. My hermeneutic are limericks. They are my methodological mode of expressing something. You may say to me, how can you do that? Well, it happened quite by accident that a Tony Award-winning director heard about what I had written, called me in, asked me to present him with the script, and then 2 weeks later said that he was going to direct it, and he wanted me to perform all the voices. So you might want to know, too, that apart from playing Jesus and the narrator, I have a rather floating sexual identity. I do all the women, too. I tell you this because I don't know where it will go. I opened in a sneak preview 2 weeks ago. I have done the show around the country. I may be opening in a theater that is being set up on the West Side. But people feel that they are hearing it for the first time. And once again, it doesn't matter who they are. They are getting the message. I imagine that I could probably do the same thing for the Buddha and call it Dharma Limerick. So, once again, those years of translating, of practicing, as it were, in the bowels of one divinity, I mean, that practice, that mode of being a point man, of being invisibly invisible, of taking on, as it were, the skin of Buddha or Jesus, and somehow, and somewhat, it seems to me, presumptuously, reinterpreting and making it come alive in 21st century diction, it's effective. The other day, I was surrounded by Mormon missionaries in Union Square who wouldn't let me out of the circle until I performed one or two. It has that kind of overreach. It just makes me realize that the imagination is critical for us today. I think of Wallace Stevens, who speaks of it in this way: how high that highest candle lights the dark. Or Lauren Bacall, who speaks of it as imagination, that's the largest kite one can fly. Mm-hmm. So for me, yes, I will respect the structures of religion and the formalities of teaching by way of the resources of reason, and therefore will use my philosophical resources, but also understanding that something else is necessary to communicate. And for me, at the moment, imagination is all.
Well, I feel like I'm supposed to start by telling you what I've done with my life prior and post HDS. Actually, these days, if you just Google, you can find out a lot about people. So I might just leave it at that. It's also in the write-up. I think how I'm feeling in the here and now is gratitude. Gratitude for this institution, for the journey it had enabled me to take, and all the unseen people who make our journeys possible. I've been very promiscuous with my work. I've I've been in HIV education. I've worked as a college chaplain and an Episcopal priest, management consultant, and now a coach. Sometimes people ask me, what do I do as a coach? And, I strategize, plan, support, solve problems. But at the end of the day, what I do is I just simply listen. I think it's one of the hardest tasks to do. I just noticed at lunch, because of the topic and interesting people and my own anxieties, that I was just talking at people. And I felt myself being talked at as well. But listening is really quite difficult. And it's also almost everything if we are to have a common ground beyond all the words that we use. It was a bit confusing this afternoon talking about ethics and religion. I think there were 10 of us at the table, and I think we had very different meanings around them. So what I do with my clients is I listen, and I listen for their hopes, and I listen for their fears. I listen for the edges of their pain and where they cannot go to. I listen to what they don't want to listen to within themselves. And by the pure act of listening, I create a platform where what needs to be expressed, what needs to become more real can come out. I think those of us who have been pastors have done that at the bedside of the sick and the suffering. But it is also true that you can do that with leaders. What I learned at Harvard Divinity School is that one of the hardest things with listening is what goes on within me. So the most delightful course I took was with Diana Eck, in a pluralism course that she taught. And having grown up as a evangelical, charismatic Christian, it's hard to listen to something that's not you. And that what makes listening difficult, I believe, is that there must be a certain kind of a kenosis within, a certain kind of a self-emptying. A little piece of ourself needs to die, shift, break open, dissolve, if we are to take in the other person. And each time I find myself wanting to talk at you, I check in within myself how I can listen. I've learned some interesting tricks that I did not learn at Harvard Divinity School. For example, to get people to listen to themselves. I was just coaching one of the MBA students across the river, and he was trying to be an entrepreneur and had all sorts of things going on in his head. And I said, well, how are you breathing right now? And what if you dropped your breath to just behind your navel? And all of a sudden things change. Like if you did it now. And I think in our present times, where we can say the same words and be in the same religious group and mean completely different things, I believe we do share some things in common. We share a common lived experience, but how do we enter into that with each other? So I'm on a quest to find these ways in which we can create these platforms for real connection. I think it's the art of those of us who are leaders, whether we are in business or whether we are in religious practice. I think of Tom. And what he did was he was willing to listen to a section of customers that Colgate didn't want to listen to. And so created a fabulous business. But the harder art is the dissolving of this speaker inside. What's happening to me as I listen to you? I find that the greatest challenge. I find that's where I feel myself incompetent. I find my own identity being challenged, my own ideas being, that I have to sort of be less attached to them. And that's where I struggle to connect. So I think if we can have some conversations about how we actually do that in ourselves, how do we actually let go? And if we could just listen to that, I think it would make a huge difference. The other thing I've learned then is that listening that creates a platform for the unfolding in the here and now of what we're actually experiencing, our joys and sadnesses and our fears and immediate insecurities. In that moment when the shame and the judgment is removed, when the shame and the judgment of self or other, when that's removed, we can actually say amazing things to each other and we can actually hear it. One of the things I discovered coaching executives is that you can really tell them bad news about themselves and they're hungry to hear. A discovery that we all crave feedback, even the most negative ones. If there is enough connectivity, enough of the lowering of anxiety, enough banishment of judgment, shame, and blame, and then you can say anything. You can say bad news, and you can deliver all the acknowledgement and affirmation that have people connect to the deepest, most amazing parts of themselves. So when I think of our work here in this school, I think of something actually quite simple then. Just the human technologies for making that happen. We might need to sort of practice and fumble our way towards that. And then to speak the good words. To speak the good words that would stir mind and spirit. David Whyte, who's one of my favorite poets, he was a poet to Boeing, says, this is not the age of information. This is not the age of information. This is a time for bread and fishes. The world is hungry to hear that. Thank you.
Wow. Breathe. Thank you to my colleagues. I came to Harvard Divinity School largely on the basis of the catalog. When I looked through that catalog and saw the range and the depth of offerings, this was back in the spring, I guess, of 1978, it was like the most huge buffet being put before me, and there was no way I could resist. But there was another reason that I came, and that was that I felt that there would be room to breathe here at Harvard. And I was a little wary of finding myself in a denominational seminary where I might be expected to think or believe one way or another. And my whole religious experience to that date had been rather eclectic, and I had been used to believing what I wanted to believe and not really being very comfortable when I was told what I should believe. I grew up a Quaker, as Belva said in the introduction, not in the purest sense of the word, but sort of Quaker. And I grew up an Episcopalian, well, not in the purest sense, but sort of. So we were Episco-Quakers. I was married to a Unitarian in the Episcopal Church, and I was baptized in that church 1 week before our wedding. That was so we would be permitted to be married there. And I landed in the United Church of Christ, and that's where my ordination took place. And I don't think the journey's over. I have a Buddhist son who is my teacher, and I have a Catholic daughter. And my Buddhist son, incidentally, also took a degree from Harvard Divinity School. And it was a very fine thing that he did. So there was an eclecticism that seemed to be born of my soul's need for exploration. And I met it here. I was very interested in the topic of death. I believed that I wanted to work in a hospital setting with people who were facing their deaths. And so I was able to take courses here looking at death from a variety of different religious viewpoints and cultural viewpoints. And I was so grateful for that opportunity. So that when I actually got into the workplace and I was working with people who were dying, I had some reference, some solid framework for my work. And I was able to enter a room not particularly concerned with what the religious affiliation of whomever it was I was going to meet would be. I was much more able to focus on who that person was in that moment in time and what meaning they were finding or not finding out of their experience. And I credit a lot of that to not only the academic training that I received here, but also for the superb field education opportunities I had. It took me 4 years, I probably shouldn't say this, but it took me 4 years to finish the Divinity School. And one of the best things about that was that I had 4 years of field education before I finished. And that was so important for me. And the supervisors I had and the colleagues with whom I worked taught me an amazing amount, not to mention the people with whom I ministered. When I left Harvard, I thought, that's it. Great education, wonderful people, farewell. Well, I'm off, and that's the end of the story. Wrong. Within a year and a half, I was supervising HDS students in the hospital setting, taking the supervisor's course in order to be able to do that. A few years later, I became happily a member of the Alumni Council, and I got to look at Harvard Divinity School from a whole different viewpoint. And a few years after that, I took on the job of team teaching with Dudley Rose, the field education supervisor's course. And so it seemed to go on that every time I would say farewell to HDS, another opportunity would come along to reconnect me. And it has been 27 years now that I've been in relationship with this school. I don't seem to be going anywhere. But I think I perhaps am a slow student, and I think my soul keeps bringing me back to this place. There's something for you here, Diana. There's something more that you haven't quite gotten yet. And what I see that being, you all, or I hope most of you, have been exposed to in the last 2 days. Extraordinary and exciting scholarship that is happening here. The depth and the reach and the innovation and the invitation which this school continues to offer is a part of what I would claim is the soul of Harvard Divinity School. You may wonder about the soul of an institution, but I can assure you that institutions have souls, and the soul of Harvard Divinity School is made up of all of those people who are students and faculty, those who lead and teach, and those who learn. And it creates a soul field for the institution. And what I have noticed over these 27 years of watching this school is that every time the school is tempted to pull back or close in, something happens to push it out again, to expand its thinking, to grow it, not necessarily in terms of physical buildings, although I know that that's something we have to think about, right, Tim? But in terms of the intellectual enterprise, in terms of the population whom the school serves, in terms of the faculty who come here, it's always reaching out. And I truly, truly believe this is what the soul of this school is calling it to be. And I would say to all of you who have, some of you may be coming here to learn about us for the first time, some of you are returning, but what I would say to all of you is that the diversity that you represent, background, experience, culture, religion, create a whole new wealth of opportunity for the soul field of Harvard Divinity School. So I hope in your being here that the school has touched you in the way that it's touched the four of us. Obviously different ways for each one of us, but that in some way you've been touched through these 4 years, 2 days. But at the same time, I want you to know that you are touching the soul field of Harvard Divinity School, and you are making a difference and will make a difference to this school. So yes, gratitude, breathing, and remembering the journey of the soul, and listening to it. Let it take you where it will, and it may bring you right back here like it has me. Thank you.
I want to say thank you to all of our panelists for such wonderful presentations and their sharing of their experience of Harvard Divinity School. I think we have time for some questions. There are 2 mics on the floor that are floating, so if you would just show your desire to ask a question, someone will come to you.
Could we ask Joe to share
Yes.
a limerick?
Yeah. All right.
Good.
Hey, Joe.
Happy to stand. Italians find it very difficult.
There we go.
Well, the problem with using the mic is that I need to move.
Let's see if this will.
Did you want one of these?
Look out, Cornelius. Yeah. Great. There we go.
I don't know how many of you went to see the rather controversial film by Mel Gibson, Passion of the Christ. For whatever reason, the trailer was remembered by lots of people. All you see, basically, is Jesus from the ankles down, his sandal feet, and he's bending down and writing on the ground while a woman is cowering in the corner. It is the only time that Jesus ever writes, at least as recorded in the Gospels. And there is, of course, that famous, what Professor Smith would call a locus classicus. The one without sin cast the first stone. So hold on to that. The woman in adultery. One bare, adulterous fact challenged all the conventions of tact. No moaning or groaning could alter the stoning of a woman caught in the act. She stood there, reviled and alone, and shook as though chilled to the bone. Then a voice from the crowd rose up clear and out loud. The sinless may cast the first stone. Now the scribes were by Moses still bound to abide by a law so profound that each chose a rock, then dropped it in shock as Christ bent down and wrote on the ground. Not a missile was heard going by, just his voice that enjoined her reply. It's true they condemn you. Is there none to condemn you? No one, Lord. Then neither will I. that she couldn't live life as before is the core of legend and lore. For sure we know this, she found pure forms of bliss in her passion for sinning. No more.
Other questions?
Ought to be addressed in the public sphere. Ways in which you feel that, particularly perhaps that this school could be doing a better job at this, or ways in which you feel we're falling out as a society in addressing it. There's a lot of religion in the air these days, but I don't get the sense that it's being addressed very head-on or directly or intelligently.
I think the civic question has been answered well enough in today's presentation, and certainly that has been answered within the context of American liberal democracy, and then in terms of how it's going to be applied to other parts of the world, it's going to be, well, can you sell that message or not? If the other question is, given religious pluralism, diversity, conflict, where are we as humanity, then this is just my point of view, because I think that's where it comes down to, and it probably describes what is actually happening. We all have now our own singular points of view. Mine, of course, is also West Coast, so bear with the San Francisco take on things. As a result of an introduction to Buddhism through Diana X course, I picked up a Vipassana practice, which is kind of radical as someone who grew up charismatic Christian. And what I have discovered in Vipassana is that there are people from all sorts of different backgrounds coming together. And Vipassana has allowed a common experience where you sort of sit for 10 days and then you can come back and sort of share, well, what did you discover? So I see this sort of almost empirical thing that's taking place in some quarters where you and I have a collaborative inquiry to say, what is happening? Forget the words, what is happening? What is this common experience? Burning Man, how many of you know Burning Man? Is this a West Coast thing? Any burners? It's another moment where I think human beings are trying to forge common experiences of immanence and transcendence, and using some old language and new language. So my own point of view is if we really want to be radical about it, it's got to be experiential in the here and now. And having having experiences of your own, and then creating the container for a conversation. And it's not going to be lecture style. You're going to have to find the structure and the format for that kind of very empirical discovery to take place. I'm going to put a stake on the ground. I think what's happening is 2,500 to 2,000 years ago, all the major insights came out. I mean, between Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad, it was 500 years. Now, for the first time, we're all coming together. So maybe this is West Coast woo-woo, but I've traveled around the world, just came back from Bhutan, which is a closeted Buddhist country. And my sense is something is emerging for those of us who want to talk about the life, our personal inner life, our interpersonal inner life, and can we stay the journey to really experience the divine human that is coming forth. I don't know whether this school is up to that kind of experiential thing. This tends to be a cerebral place.
I'm a little afraid that there's a laziness in the culture about delving into the deep issues around religion. I think it seems as if we would rather take the surface explanation and live with that than seek real truth in any of our religious disciplines. And I do worry about this. We're a culture who's had things pretty easy, and I think we've lost the ability to struggle, to dialogue, to seriously debate from a base of knowledge these kinds of issues. And that's obviously not true of Harvard Divinity School, but I do think it's true of the culture, and I just don't know, therefore, how you take what is being taught here and make it applicable, offer it in a way that isn't pablum to a society that may not wish to investigate it.
Well, thank you. I think both offerings are well worth carrying away from here. And I think, too, about how this was dealt with, 3,000 years ago, however many years ago, when we wanted to try to record what we were experiencing. And parable and storytelling remain very powerful means of transferring meaning from one person to another. Dialogue is another means of helping self-understanding, because while we can be indignant or appalled at what is being discussed in the public marketplace or in the public square today, fact is we're not going to know what we feel and how we feel until we start behaving experientially, like talking about it, like acting out on something. I work with CEOs who are interested in getting into a common circle with other CEOs away from their organizations so that they can share what issues and problems they have with one another. And they don't have, they're, for the most part, they can speak about their dilemmas, the conflict of values that they have, and their inability to go anywhere with those conflict of values, except to sort of go home and think about doing the right thing. Well, doing the right thing is simply not an adequate conclusion.
Yep.
But that is pretty much the extent to which they can, many go. They need to be in conversation with others about the details of the real down-on-the-ground problems. Mm-hmm. Whatever is happening in the world is happening in any given corporation or any given institution, because they are themselves microcosms of what's going on in the world. So as leaders, we get to hear, we get to experience and have to struggle with what are those. So I think I like very much what I see of our scholars who are going out into the world to write and to experiment, to research, as we're seeing some of our faculty members do, and they are getting great reputations. They are helping the communities that they are working in, and they are bringing our name with them. But if we want to organize to do more as an institution, I think we have to remember the words of diversity, dialogue, experiential learning, and witnessing to one another what's real and what has worked, storytelling. I think that our power to convene and to create those moments is still one of our greatest assets here, because we have the name. Thank you.
Dennis, you have a question?
To follow up on this general theme of thinking of the interaction of religion and the business community, the country has come through a season of significant corporate scandals in the last while. And while many people are alarmed at this, I imagine many of us feel kind of helpless in knowing how to respond. And certainly, Tom, what you just brought up is one strategy, one point of leverage of bringing together corporate executives to kind of talk through the issues. And Leng, it sounds like you've also tried to bridge those fields. So I'd be interested in any additional reflections you have on maybe stories of hope or points of leverage, because the American business community is as large a force as any in the world. And the kind of world we live in will be shaped in large part by corporate America. And what are the points of leverage or stories of hope that this might be a redemptive force in the world? And it sounds like, Joe, you have some thoughts too.
Yeah. I think these redemptive stories are told one at a time with individuals at one at a time. I'd love to write a little essay called On Cool, on hanging out, on being awesome. These are all the cliched words, of course, that are used. But when you begin to examine those words, you begin to realize that there's a great deal of depth behind them, even if they tend to be generalizations. And I hear them all the time from my students. I function to some extent as a kind of priest itinerant. You know, I tell people I hang out at Starbucks where I buck stars. You know? I sit on park benches, and to hear the stories of young people, I ask an impertinent question like, is that a classic you're reading? You break the circle at any one point, you're everywhere. Now, the reason why I point this out is that I've done this regularly, and I'll just tell you one story of hope. About 2 years ago, I used to go to the park and do my meditation. I find it much easier to pray in Union Square Park than in a church. I like the denizens of that park. I like the mix. There was a young man who was sitting all the time in front of me, but with this kind of desperate look. Well, I made the effort to go up to him, to talk with him, to push the story quickly. He was an Algerian. He was undocumented. His English was not very good, so we spoke French. In the course of 6 months, I bought him English, Arabic dictionaries. We read in the park English to Arabic, or Arabic to English rather. I got him in conversation with a young man I also met at Starbucks who was interested in Middle Eastern studies. On alternate days, they taught each other English and Arabic. This young man did come up to Harvard for an interview. He went to Dubai for 2 years of study in Arabic and was teaching English over there as a result of this chance encounter. Okay. Abdul was interviewed by Now when they heard that I was tutoring him, and it became a possible story for how you stop terrorism one by one. Just create a connection. He told the woman who interviewed him that I was the closest friend he'd ever had. Now, I found that astonishing. He disappeared, and I still don't know exactly what happened to him. My worst scenario was that he was sent to Guantanamo. I'd like to think he managed to get out of the country and get back to his own country. He was a biologist by trade. I have a feeling that someday he will show up. But that he took that back with him, that friendship, that connection. He knew I was a Christian, and I was probably the only priest he's ever met. Now, I can tell you other stories like that, but I think that's how it's done. I mean, I think it's just done one by one.
I'll speak very loudly. Can ethics be taught, or do you have to regulate it?
I don't know how many of you are familiar with the work of Robert Keegan at the Ed School, where he's been talking about different developmental stages, different orders of mind, or Kohlberg's work. He was from Harvard too. I don't know where he was, but 8 moral stages of moral development, and then Fowler's work on spiritual development. So I've been looking at it developmentally. So I think if you want to teach ethics, and it means what the group wants, which Keegan would call third order of mind, group norms, you can do it. And that's what Sunday school is all about. Unfortunately, the world has become very complex. And so we're making the transition from third to fourth, which requires us to be cognizant of what the rules are, and then how do we have a self-authoring mind, which is fourth order. But the self-authoring moral stance can look a little bit similar like the regressed impulsive self at 2. Sometimes I think of business people as between 2, 3, and 4, Is the one who is really greedy and impulsive 2, or is that self-authoring and breaking some rules? So I think here in the moral universe is that rules are broken. I mean, there's nothing kind of static about them. So again, when we talk about teaching ethics, developmentally, where are we pitching it? So that's my academic response. The good story was, when I decided to go to business school, people said, "Well, you're going to get a degree from God and the devil," but can't decide which from which school. But I certainly had my own kind of cultural shock at the business school. And then I started a men's group, 8 men together. You take the women out, and men can be less competitive with each other. Kind of an interesting thing if you think of gender dynamics. But we sat and we had a talking stick, stuff you learn in pastoral ministry, and you pass around a talking stick, and we just talked. So I have this working hypothesis that, some of our worst moral scandals are around sex, power, and money. Well, those are the 3 issues you can't talk about. I mean, if I asked you, any one of you, so how much do you make? Do you tell me, well, is this figure and this is my asset? No, it isn't. Sometimes it's not even talked within a household. So if we don't talk, we're doing it alone. And, I figured if you're doing it alone, you make lots of mistakes. I mean, so it can be something as mechanical as that. But if there's a way to talk, I also did HIV education, So now we know how HIV is caused and, how to prevent it. And why is it still happening? You don't switch on the light and say, let's have a conversation. And it's also not only just a conversation about the facts, right? Like, do you want to use, prophylaxis? It's the conversation about the underlying feelings. I am now in this moment feeling just kind of a little bit scared having this conversation with you about how we want to be in this relationship. Now that takes the conversation, the dialogue to a whole different level. And that's a harder conversation to have, and most of us don't have the skills to do that. We're always talking about things. But if you talk about feelings, that's deeper. And then if you talk about how you are feeling about those feelings and that relationship in that moment, and so those of us who have been in you get what I'm trying to say? Yes. So it comes to dialogue rather than sort of series of monologues that are taking place. But again, I think the ethical lapses are taking place in the places that we have no permission to really talk about what is happening.
I think moral behavior requires one's own intentionality. To know what's right and to want to be a good person somehow just isn't enough. We need to be intentional about being a good person. And to be intentional, for me, my research has shown me that we have some tools that we need to use in that way. We need to be connected to this power beyond ourselves, whatever we call that selves, and to know that we're in a relationship with this power that has some higher ability and state of being than we do ourselves. Whether that's a higher self within or a higher self without doesn't matter to me. And we need to know ourselves, because one of the things I want to do with my life is to be myself. But if I don't know myself, then I want to be what the world wants me to be. And then I'm going to need a lot of rules. And I'll bounce around just short of the rules, or I might go over the rules, over the line. So my approach to this is to develop moral autonomy, not moral independence, but moral autonomy, because I agree with Leng that we need each other I need your courage to really be courageous. I need someone else's courage to really be courageous. We need each other to do these things. And so the checks and balances organizationally are important. Knowing who we are, knowing what we care about deeply, living that faithful life, and I don't mean fearful life, I mean faithful life, and doing it openly with sojourners who want the same thing is going to keep me honest and is going to keep me courageous. But I don't have any more faith that I could do it alone. I'm capable of making the same mistakes or the mistakes that we're reading about. You know, I have a private company. We started this with a small amount of money. If I wanted to borrow a few bucks from the company, I would borrow a few bucks from the company. I didn't have to pay it back before I showed a financial statement to my board of directors, as this fellow Phillips has had to come up with $345 million every 90 days. But I borrowed money from my own company until the company got more diverse and we had shareholders and we had a board of directors and we had committees and audit committees and blah, 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 blah. And that's what you need, so that I won't borrow money from my own company. We're talking about ourselves when we're reading these papers. We just have had a helping hand along the way that we haven't gone there. So
I think there's time for just one more question. There's a hand right there.
It's not a question, it's really a comment or response. Particularly I was thinking about Diana, who was one of my extraordinary teachers when I was a student here more than 20 years ago, about the soul of the institution, the soul of this school, particularly for me as I've gone on in the last 20 years to a whole life after HDS that was nothing of what I thought it would be like at all. Joe, very much as you described, a bridge or sort of a translator of the spirit between the priest who stands at the interpenetration of worlds, to sort of show that forth and encourage that kind of sharing of substance, or what Kenneth Berg talks about being consubstantial, the yearning to kind of break past the boundaries of flesh and bone here. But for me, the enterprise of the Divinity School it's always been so much about how do we embody and teach and manifest and show forth, both when we're here in this kind of initiation, this experience here at the Divinity School, and then go out and how do we embody, teach, show forth, and encourage complexity of text, and text most broadly and widely construed, and to understand that, to do that, and to do that without fear, is in itself a place to stand.
Thank you.
Let me just finish off for us, if I might, and thank the panel and Belva for
an interesting afternoon, a rather very personal afternoon, I think. Thank you. I will be very brief. We're almost to the witching hour, and let me just say a couple of things. I want to thank you all again for coming. I've thanked you before, but afterwards I'm particularly grateful because I think there have been some very interesting discussions, and I've certainly enjoyed talking with many of you. It's an interesting thing. I mean, I've found it in 3 years to be interesting to be involved with the Divinity School because, first of all, I find that an awful lot of people don't know what a Divinity School means. I mean, when you use that term, it's a early 19th, late 18th, early 19th century term. It carries all sorts of connotations that are puzzling, I think. It certainly is evident that it's about religion. It's certainly, if you look at our faculty and look at our students, it's about religion in almost any sector of human activity that people are engaged in. And I'd like to think that's the sort of thing it will continue to be. We do train some religious professionals, but we also train a lot of simply people to go out and, as you've seen here, to be active in a variety of different types of careers and types of vocations. I always used to tell my classes when we started out, particularly with undergraduate classes, and what did I mean by religion and talking about religion, and I always said I felt that religiousness is basically having, and I had this certainly from one of my teachers, is basically having the sense that there's more to life than meets the eye. And I simply would probably leave it pretty much at that. As I've studied the history of religion around the world, I've found that it certainly is highly various and highly variable, and people take that sense that there's something more than meets the eye, and they run with it in all sorts of different directions, and some of them are very bad directions, and some of them are very good directions. Religion has probably caused as much evil as it has done good in the world, but it makes it, I think, infinitely human and infinitely fascinating, and I really think it's wonderful that a group of people like this would actually come out and spend 24 hours, 36 hours to come and sit and talk about particular issues. I would just like to say that I hope this will be a group that will continue to want to come together at least once a year and to explore particular kinds of topics that do talk about religion in relation to other aspects of human life. We've talked about civil society. I think I would like to ask that everybody think about what kinds of topics you'd like for us to treat as a group. I would hope also that maybe next year we could move to perhaps even more opportunity for interchange and discussion within members of this body of some 100 people. Actually, now we're not quite 100 at the moment, but we were nearly that last night, certainly, and this morning earlier. And any other suggestions that you might have. As I said last night, I view this yes, as trying to enlarge the circle of people who know about us and can in some sense be ambassadors for this school in terms of talking about what's going on there, in terms of helping us and frankly raise the funds to do the sorts of things that we think are important to do. All of that will be wonderful, but I also think about it as a way to begin to expand the scope of what we as a faculty and a student body do, and whether that involves getting more of the faculty involved in discussions with this group, or even some of the students, so the current students, is not just former students, many of whom are here, but others involved. We can try to do some of that. So I would be very grateful, I think all of us would be grateful, and those that have worked on this would be extremely grateful for any suggestions that you have about this. I won't go on any longer with that, but it's just an invitation to be engaged with me and with us about what this group might be most interested in taking the time to come together to do. Because I recognize it's a commitment of time by all of you who are leaders in your own particular areas, whether local or regional or national, whether in one profession or another. We do I think we have an amazing group of people that were assembled here under the title of Leadership Council, and it's leadership because it's a group of leaders, I think, almost exclusively.
And that's an exciting group of people to bring together. But I also don't think we ought to come together to simply twiddle our thumbs. I think we ought to be doing something constructive and interesting and useful. And I hope you found at least the better part of what we've done in the last 24 hours to be that. Let me just note in leaving you not only that we look forward to seeing you next year, but also that in regard to being in touch, there should be a card in the portfolios that you've got which you can fill out to reserve. If you're not already getting them, if you're already getting them, I trust they will continue coming. But if they're not getting them, you can get subscriptions for free to our publications, the Harvard Divinity Bulletin and Harvard Divinity Today. And we will certainly like to keep you informed about things by at least sending those out. We also have a pretty active website that I think is getting better all the time, and I encourage you to go to the HDS website. For that matter, the Harvard website. I think the Harvard website also gives you a sense of the larger university and things that are going on, not just in the Divinity School, but around the university that are often really quite fascinating. And I think the website's improved a lot in both cases, ours and the larger university site. And you can drop that card off in the lobby, probably with any number of people, and it will find its way there. Also, if any of you do have a little more time before your flights leave or you've got to get in the car and drive, you're certainly welcome to, I think your portfolio has instructions for a kind of walking tour of HDS if you don't know the place and would like to do it, and you're only about 3 minutes from there. If you go out through the back park here and work your way over 1 block, you're at the Divinity School. There were a few limbs down this morning across the path as I came over. I moved some of them, but they may still be down, or new ones may have fallen, but I think you can find your way. So feel free, certainly, to come over and do that. And I hope that in the variety of things that we've done, there's been something for everyone. And I would thank again all of those who spoke, and particularly our guest speaker, Rami Khoury, for coming. It's been a privilege for me to be a part of this. Thank you all for coming, and do keep in touch, okay? Thank you.